Luxembourg. December 1944. Snow slashed sideways, like handfuls of salt thrown into the eyes. The 57mm G*N trembled, the frozen steel sang in the cold. I lay in the snow, cupping a small compass in my gloved hand, a toy, shiny and battered, its cheap needle shivering. Somewhere ahead came the deep growl of tank engines, German Panthers. The ground quivered. My breath turned to smoke. I checked the bearing again, 202 degrees southwest. That bend in the road would expose their flank. The men behind me whispered, teeth chattering, rifles buried in frost. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I kept staring at the compass, at that tiny trembling arrow. Why was a farm boy from Ohio holding a toy compass in the middle of a tank battle? Northern Luxembourg, near the town of Clairvaux. They said it was the quiet sector. That was the first lie. The Battle of the Bulge had erupted only days earlier, Hitler's last throw of the dice. We'd heard the thunder from the north, 88s, mortars, and the slow crush of armor rolling through the Ardennes like a glacier made of steel. By the time the shock reached us, the lines had already bent. Our platoon, part of the U.S. 28th Infantry Division, was assigned to hold the road south of Clairvaux. 12 men, one 57mm anti-tank G*N, 2 carbines that jammed in the cold, and a radio that spoke more static than orders. Command said, "Hold the road until reinforcements arrive." That was the second lie. By the book, holding meant setting up a defensive line along the roadside, anchoring positions, and waiting for armor support. The book didn't mention the ground being frozen solid, so hard our shovels bent. It didn't mention that our map was soaked through from sleet, or that the telephone wire had snapped like sugar glass. It certainly didn't mention what it felt like when the wind hit your face at 20 below while you tried to feed a shell into a G*N that refused to turn because the grease inside had frozen. Orders said to dig in. Reality said we'd die standing up. We took shelter in a drainage ditch beside the road, half buried in crusted snow. The G*N sat there like an orphan machine, its barrel wrapped in rags to keep the frost from splitting the paint. I remember touching the steel and feeling the cold bite through the glove, sharp, clean, merciless. Every sound traveled for miles, a twig snapping, a shovel scraping, a cough. We could hear the forest breathe. Somewhere out there, the German armor was advancing west, fast. Panthers, maybe even tigers. You could tell by the sound, panthers growled, tigers groaned. I learned to hear the difference the way farmers learn the moods of the wind. The ground itself trembled when they shifted gears. Lieutenant Doyle, our commander, was a good man but a textbook soldier. Every move he made came from the field manual, page and verse. Hold the road, he repeated like a prayer. He meant well. He also meant to die by the book. I'd been assigned to the G*N crew 6 months earlier. Before that, I worked survey stakes back home, marking hills, reading angles, watching how the land folded under shadow. The earth made sense to me. Lines, slopes, bearings, they all obeyed laws that men often forgot in the heat of war. I knew that road near Clairvaux didn't run straight, it curled southwest at 202 degrees, hugging the slope before dropping toward a farmhouse. That curve wasn't much, maybe 10 degrees off true, but it meant everything. It turned the road into a funnel. If the Panthers came through that bend, they'd have to show their left sides for just a moment, bare steel, perfect range. But our orders said the G*N should face front, not sideways. Standard alignment, Doyle called it. A phrase for bureaucrats. I tried to explain geometry to him. He tried to explain obedience to me. Neither of us was wrong. Only one of us would survive the argument. Night came early in those woods. By 4 o'clock, the horizon was already blue-black, the snow reflecting just enough light to make every shadow move. We had no air cover, clouds hung thick as wool. Artillery was somewhere behind us, lost in the static. The 57mm sat silent, barrel low, crew half frozen. The men whispered about pulling back, about the futility of orders without maps, without context. I kept my mouth shut. I was watching the compass. It was small, almost a joke, with a scratched brass ring and a cloudy lens. My sister had given it to me before I shipped out from Ohio. She'd said, just in case you ever get lost. At the time, I thought she meant roads. Later I learned she meant reason. The needle shook constantly, fighting the wind, but it always came back to center. I envied that certainty. We waited like that for hours, frozen ghosts behind a silent G*N, snow piling on our helmets, each of us pretending the sound we heard wasn't what it was. But around midnight, I felt the vibration through the ice, deep, rhythmic, mechanical. The ground itself began to hum. That wasn't thunder. It was engines. German engines. And somewhere between command's orders and the compass's truth, I realized which one I was going to follow. Before the war, I measured the world in acres and shadows. Highland County, Ohio, soft hills, clay roads, barns that leaned with age. My family worked 80 acres of corn and wheat, same as my grandfather before us. The land was poor, but steady. If you listened, you could tell the weather 3 days ahead by how the wind crossed the fields. That was my first kind of map, not lines on paper, but rhythm, contour, breath. I wasn't born for war. I was born to fix fences and mend tractors. My father taught me how to read a plumb line before I could write my name. He was a quiet man, hard on work, soft on talk. He said machines didn't lie, only men did. He kept a brass compass in his pocket, old and scratched, and used it to lay irrigation ditches in straight lines across fields that seemed endless. One summer, when I was 13, we were surveying a rise near the southern fence. The sun was high, and the air was thick with heat. He handed me the compass, said, "Go on, take the reading." I held it wrong, needle spinning. He laughed, the only time I remember hearing him laugh that loud, and said, "Even if you don't know where you're going, the compass does." I never forgot that. Years later, when I shipped out, I found that same phrase scribbled on the inside of his old tool chest. When the Depression hit, we fixed everything we could because we couldn't buy new. I learned to weld cracked plow blades, straighten bent axles, sharpen harvester blades dull from rock. By 18, I could measure slope by eye and direction by the way grass leaned after rain. That sense, of land, of bearing, never left me. It wasn't bravery that made me steady under fire later, it was familiarity. War was just terrain, twisted and burning instead of green. My sister, Ruth, was the light in that house. 7 years younger, all energy and questions. She used to tag along when I walked the fields, pointing out clouds and naming them wrong just to make me correct her. Once, at the train station in Cincinnati, as I was leaving for basic training, she gave me a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a toy compass, brass-colored, glass cracked at one corner, needle thin as a hair. She said, "Just in case you ever get lost." I told her I wouldn't. She said, "Not on the ground, Danny. In here." She pointed to my chest. Then she cried and ran before I could answer. The compass stayed with me through everything, Louisiana mud, English rain, French dust. It wasn't reliable for navigation, half the time it stuck when I needed it most, but I carried it anyway. A joke among soldiers. A charm among ghosts. I enlisted in 42, after Pearl Harbor. The Army didn't need farmers, it needed G***ners. My mechanical aptitude test landed me in artillery school. They trained us to measure angles, compute trajectories, adjust for wind and temperature. It felt familiar, like farming, but with mathematics instead of weather. They called it indirect fire. I called it logic. When the instructors spoke about lines of sight, I thought of furrows. When they said range tables, I thought of fence posts stretching toward a vanishing point. By the time we reached Europe, I could calculate bearing without thinking, a reflex, not a SK**LL. And when I joined the 28th Infantry Division, those instincts became the one thing the manuals couldn't teach, how to see the ground as an equation. The others called me compass, half mockery, half respect. I didn't mind. In war, any name that isn't carved on a grave is worth keeping. They say character shows in combat, but that isn't true. Combat only reveals the shape already there, it burns away what's soft, leaves what's structural. What I brought from Ohio wasn't courage, it was geometry. A sense that everything had alignment, even chaos, if you looked long enough. So when I crouched behind that G***N near Clairvaux, snow freezing to my collar, listening to engines grow closer, I wasn't thinking of strategy or honor or orders. I was thinking of my father's hand on mine, steadying a compass needle, and my sister's voice saying, "Just in case you ever get lost." In that moment, with the forest trembling and command silent, I realized I hadn't lost my way. I just reached the bend. And the compass, cheap, cracked, stubborn, pointed toward disobedience. The first shells fell just before dawn. At first we thought it was thunder. Then the forest floor shook, and bark rained down like splinters of bone. The air smelled of iron and sap. Somewhere beyond the tree line, German artillery was walking its fire toward the road, slow, deliberate, probing. Lieutenant Doyle ordered us to stay low and hold. His voice came clipped through the static of the field phone. Positions confirmed. G*N1 covers the road. Do not relocate. Repeat, do not relocate. By the book, it was sound doctrine. By the compass in my pocket, it was suicide. We'd emplaced the 57mm G*N along the straight stretch of the road, barrel pointed east. From there, we could hit anything that came head-on, provided it announced itself, stayed in formation, and didn't flank us. But roads curve. Maps lie. 200 yards ahead, the bend angled southwest at precisely 202 degrees. That curve meant everything. Any tank rounding it would have to show its left flank, the softest armor a Panther carried. I'd measured it myself the night before, using the toy compass and a length of signal wire for sighting. One chance, one bearing. When the shelling paused, I unfolded the wet map on my knee and traced the pencil line again. Sir, I said, if we pull the G*N 20 yards behind that curve, we can take them broadside. They'll never see us until they turn. Doyle leaned over, lips pale, eyes red from lack of sleep. You calculated that with this? He jabbed a glove at the little brass compass hanging from my buttonhole. With this, I said, and common sense. The men snickered, frostbitten faces cracking in half-hearted grins. Someone muttered, Captain Toy Compass saves the day. Even I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. They didn't see what I saw, the geometry of disaster. Doyle straightened, brushing snow off his collar. Orders are clear. G*N stays on the axis of advance. We hold the road. Sir, the road bends. He stared at me a long time, then said quietly, You're a good *T, Hutchins. Don't make yourself a bad soldier. That ended it, for the moment. We went back to our tasks, clearing the breach, checking elevation gears, wiping the frost from the sight. The cold made the steel moan when it moved. Each breath turned to crystals that clung to the recoil guard. I felt like I was inside a frozen lung. Around noon, the snow thickened until the world disappeared. The forest and the sky became one sheet of white noise. Through it came the faint rumble, tank engines, slow, patient, moving in convoy. I looked up from the G*N and met Doyle's eyes. He'd heard it too. Stay ready, he said. Direction? I asked. He tilted his head, listening. East, maybe southeast. No, I whispered. The vibration was coming through the ground, diagonally. Southwest. 202 degrees. He didn't answer. I placed my hand on the trail leg of the G*N, feeling the vibration deepen, like a heartbeat under ice. The Panthers were closing, maybe a mile out. The men around me checked ammunition, their hands clumsy from the cold. Each shell weighed 6 kilos, slick with frost. We had 23 left. No resupply. The wind carried faint metallic clanks, hatches, couplings, turrets turning. I could picture it perfectly, the lead tank taking the bend, the second following, both sides exposed for a breath before the line straightened again. One breath was all we would get. I went to Doyle once more. Sir, let me reposition. Just the width of the road. We'll still cover the line. He shook his head. You move that G*N without orders, you'll answer for it. I looked at him, not defiant, just calculating. We'll answer either way. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the hiss of falling snow. Then he turned away, speaking into the phone that no longer worked. Static answered him. That was our entire chain of command, a wire buried under ice. As evening fell, the snow turned to fine needles. The forest glowed faintly from reflected moonlight. I checked the compass again. The needle quivered, then steadied on 202 degrees. The same number since morning. The same direction death would come from. I folded the map, slid it into my coat, and whispered, mostly to the compass, maybe to myself. If the book says stay, and the earth says move, which one's right? No one heard me. The men were already staring into the dark, waiting for engines. Waiting for the rule that would break itself. Night came like a lid. Snow thickened until the world narrowed to a tunnel of gray 10, maybe 30 feet long. The wind shaved the drifts flat and left them shining like hammered tin. Our breaths turned to white rope in the beam of a covered flashlight. We moved quietly, because sound traveled farther than courage. The engines were out there, patient and heavy. You don't hear Panthers the way you hear trucks or half-tracks. You feel them first, deep through the ribs of the earth, then you catch the iron clatter, the faint grind of interleaved road wheels. I counted the pulses. 3, then a lull, then 2 more. A column, spaced. Not in a hurry. Confident. The radio was a box of ghosts. Doyle kept talking into it anyway, jaw working, hand cupped over the handset like he could warm it back to life. Only static answered, soft, then ragged, then soft again, like surf against a winter pier. Reinforcements weren't coming. If they were, we would have heard engines behind us, or seen a sliver of friendly tracer cut the dark. We saw nothing. We were alone with a road, a bend, and a rule. We had 12 men, 1 57mm, 23 armor-piercing, 5 he, 2 smoke. Grease in the traverse gear had stiffened to tallow. We rubbed it with our bare hands for minutes that felt like hours until the wheel would move without screaming. The sight fogged, cleared, fogged. I wiped it with the edge of my scarf. The cold bit through the rag into my skin and stayed there. I checked the compass again. The toy needle shivered, tried to bolt, then steadied, 202 degrees. The same number. The one truth that did not bend. I thought about the shape of the road and how steel must take it, lead tank wide, second tank hugging the inside, both exposing their hearts for a breath. If we stayed here, we would meet them head-on, shoot into the teeth, and die obedient. I crawled forward to the ditch lip and let the snow sift onto my sleeve. The bend was a darker gray against the night, a suggestion more than a line. Between us and it lay 20 yards of open road, 2 frozen ruts, 1 broken telephone pole. We could haul the G*N by hand if no one slipped. If anyone slipped, the Panthers would see our silhouettes as they turned and paint us flat to the road. I slid back, touched Doyle's arm. Sir. It has to be the bend. He looked at me a long time through frost-whitened lashes. Exhaustion had sanded him down to the manual's bones. We hold here. It came out almost tender, like he was tired of arguing with the weather. I nodded, as if I'd accepted it. Then I breathed in the metal air, tasted cordite old and new, and counted the pulses again. Closer now. The ground said decision. I gathered the crew with a curl of my fingers. No words, just gloved hands. We rehearsed the movement in pantomime, 2 on the trail legs, 2 on the muzzle, me on the wheel to keep it from slewing. On my mark, we dragged the G*N backward into the darkness, then angle it into the pocket behind the curve, muzzle low, fuse set, first round armor piercing with a tracer base so I could walk the next if the sight died. One chance. Only one. The wind shifted. Snow came at us sideways, a thick gray veil. Good. It would hide noise. Bad. It would hide their silhouettes too. Behind me, the youngest private, Henley, Iowa boy, 19, whispered a prayer that sounded like a radio check. I put the compass into my breast pocket so I could feel it bite. Cold brass against bone. The engines deepened. A new note in them, transmission strain. Climb grade, reduce throttle, take the turn. I raised my hand. Doyle's head snapped toward me. He knew. For a second we just looked at each other. He didn't give permission. I didn't ask. Now, I said. We lifted. The G*N came free with a groan that felt louder than artillery. Boots slipped, boots caught. Snow burned our shins. We crabbed backward, inches at a time, breath synchronized because anything unsynchronized would be panic. At the road's crown the wheel snagged, I shoved my shoulder into the shield and felt the steel accept me. The carriage rolled. We slid into the pocket, the world closing in until only the bend existed. I swung the muzzle to where the road would open a tank's ribs. The sight fogged again. I didn't need it. I had the angle in my hands. The first Panther's bow light winked once in the snow like an eye-opening. 1 *T. Only one. I didn't call it disobedience. I called it geometry you could touch. Crew on the trails, I whispered. No chatter. Watch your footing. We were already in the pocket behind the curve, G*N slewed toward the place where steel would present its ribs. Snow hissed over the shield. The traverse will turned like a joint packed with sand. I kept pressure steady so it wouldn't cry out. The road told the rest of the plan. We dragged brush across our old ruts to erase them. Then I sent 2 men upslope with a tow chain and a can of gasoline. The abandoned jeep sat 100 yards back in the trees, half buried, radio dead since noon. I didn't want wreckage. I wanted suggestion. Punch holes in the drift, I told them. Make it look like we panicked. They understood. We were all fluent in fear. They rolled the jeep to the road's crown, then I struck the flare and touched it to the seat springs. The fire woke in a low orange crawl, then licked up through canvas and rubber, throwing a small, mean light into the snowfall. Heat rolled over my face and vanished on the wind. Tires warped. Paint blistered. I walked a slow circle, stamping in a confusion of retreat prints, a scatter that said men had run, not maneuvered. On the far shoulder, I dragged the tip of a shovel to mimic skid. 2 short lines. A long one. The lie felt cold and honest. When the flame settled into a smolder, we hauled the 57 back into shadow, barrel low, fuse caps lined in a tin lid beside my knee. I laid the first round across the breech, APC, tracer base. Second, APC, no tracer. Third, in case infantry spilled around the wrecks. Henley glanced at me. "Sir, this is not in the manual," I said. "Good." He smiled without teeth and went to the trail leg, hands ready. Lieutenant Doyle arrived out of the gray like a statue shoved forward by wind. He stared at the smoking jeep, then at the way we'd set the G*N, its sight offset to the bend. "That's not by the book, Sergeant." "The book doesn't know where the bend is," I answered. My voice even, not daring the air to carry anything extra. He looked at my pocket where the toy compass pressed a round bruise in the wool. "You using that trinket to write doctrine now?" "I'm using it to live through doctrine," I said. Silence, except for the steady chew of engine somewhere beyond the curve. He could hear it too, the sound had the calm of confidence. Panthers coming unhurried, noses high, crews inside warm with gasoline heat and certainty. "You've altered the position," he said finally. "And set a decoy. If this fails." "If it fails, the report writes itself," I said. "If it works, there won't be time to write at all." He closed his eyes for a beat. When he opened them, he didn't nod, didn't bless, didn't curse. He stepped aside. That was enough. We pulled the netting low over the shield and built the rest of the illusion. A coil of barbed wire dragged crooked across the ditch. 2 emptied ammo crates tossed near the road like someone fled mid-resupply. I angled one so a few brass casings winked through snow. The picture said chaos, the angle said ambush. "Traverse slow," I told the G*Ner. "Let the trunnions feel the road." Elevation? -3 mils from the sighted mark. Snow will lift the sh*T. I checked the compass one last time. The needle tried to flee, then settled on 202 degrees. The number felt like a temperature burned into bone. Perfect. The first wash of headlight broke the snow, soft, yellow, complacent. It painted the smoke from the Jeep and turned it to a welcoming fog. The lead Panther eased in, guard down, turret straight, commander buttoned because he trusted what he thought he saw, Americans gone to pieces. I raised my hand. The crew leaned into their stations like parts of a machine. "On my squeeze," I said. Not before. The G*N was a held breath. The forest, a vault. The road, a theorem. Behind us, Doyle's voice came low, almost human. "For God's sake, make it count." I set my shoulder to the shield, felt the recoil before it existed, and put the crosshair where the flank would be when the world turned the next 12 feet. One rule left to break. I broke it. They came like a shadow that knew its lines. Headlight first, a pale coin in the snow, then the bulk, the Panther's hull, flat and arrogant, a moving wall that ate sound. The lead tank rounded the bend with the casual confidence of something that had never known a problem it could not crush. Its commander leaned forward, binoculars fogged, trusting the sightlines and the map and whatever report told him the road was clean. I watched it present its flank for the space of a heartbeat. "Hold," I breathed. The G*N answered like a thing with a single mind. The first round left the breach with a noise that felt like the throat of the world opening. The tracer slashed through the snow and found metal where the armor thinned at the engine deck. There was a sound that wasn't a sound, an intake of air and the wrecking of steel, and then a blast of fire that threw snow and splinters into the trees. The Panther blurred into a bloom of heat. Its crew had no time to learn what hit them, heat told it all. There was a second. That second was everything. The following Panther lurched as the first burst opened a seam in the column. It tried to stop, to back away, but its track found a depression covered by a drift. There, we had laid a buried mine earlier in the month, and fate or luck put its tread right on top. The explosion was sudden and terrible, metal folding like paper. The road became a choke. 2 Tigers, if they'd come, would have been enough to push us flat, but 2 Panthers stopped the advance more effectively than a line of men with rifles. Men shouted. The Germans cursed. For an instant the forest filled with a smell of burnt powder and oil and the white, bitter tang of snow turned to steam. Flames licked at the hulls, painting the trees with light. Track links spun uselessly. The column jammed, vehicles telescoped together like broken vertebrae. We fired once more, not to destroy but to deny. A second armor round that someone had saved for a better angle found burial in a fuel tank and made a furnace out of a panther's flank. The third shell was high explosive, to keep infantry from flowing through the wrecks and to make any salvage attempt a cautious business. In 15 seconds the road, the single artery the Germans needed, became a barricade of twisted steel. Then the small moments, a metal hatch creaked, a hand, blackened, crawled over charred paint, a man staggered out, face burned, eyes wide as if surprised to still be breathing. We trained rifles at movement. A private, shaking, aimed and his finger tightened. I grabbed his wrist, hard, and shoved it down. He surrendered, I said. That's enough. One of the Germans, young, singed, coughing, looked at us with something that was not bravado. He spoke in broken English, the word mechanic slipping out on a breath like a prayer. Mechanic. Not soldier. We kept our distance. The rule of war is brittle and sharp, mercy is another tool, one that costs something to use. Henley, the boy from Iowa, lowered his rifle though his hands trembled. I walked forward, boots sinking, the compass heavy in my pocket like a small accusation. The man collapsed on his knees, hands raised. Later that night, under a sky rinsed clear by wind and the after-fires, one of those German men, an engineer with soot in his hair and maps in his head, led a small band of our scouts to a camouflaged fuel depot 3 miles off the main road. He spoke quickly, fingers pointing, face working with relief and fear. He'd seen the depot several days before when his unit passed, his conscience, or survival, made him a guide. The scouts took his information, moved with a silence born of calculation, and prevented what would have been a devastating ambush on a relief column an hour later. Lieutenant Doyle came to me after the smoke cooled. He kept his words low as if afraid noise would unmake them. You saved us, Hutchins, he said. You saved a lot of men. But you know how this looks. I did. I knew reports loved neat things, orders followed, doctrine obeyed, lines drawn. Messy heroism, one born of a toy compass and a farmer's eye, didn't often fit their forms. He put a hand on my shoulder, brief and formal, then stepped back into the book that kept men safe by naming them as units instead of choices. The wrecked Panthers lay like teeth pulled from a jaw. The road ahead was clogged for 8 hours measured in fuel delays, command reassignments, and the slow drag of reinforcements diverting around the blockage. That delay let a battalion move into position, let flanks be bolstered, let men who would otherwise have been caught on the move find cover and breathe. It cost us little and saved a great many. When the day ended and the forest went quiet in a way that was not peace but a tired truce, I sat in the ditch and took the compass from my pocket. The little needle was still, a bemused thing in a world that had not been amused. Someone laughed somewhere in the trees, soft, nervous, and a man passed a canteen. Orders would not credit the compass. Reports would speak more of artillery and air and logistics than of a bend and a cracked toy. I knew that. I also knew the difference that one correct bearing can make when the world is trying to k*LLU. Later, when children ask how you stop a tank, you might tell them precision and patience. I tell them about the needle and the bend and the moment when a man chooses the earth over a manual. When the firing stopped, sound did not return right away. It bled back in slow layers, crackling metal, the soft hiss of snow on hot armor, and the thin whimper of engines dying. Smoke slid low across the road, black on white. The wind changed and carried the smell of fuel east, away from us. We stayed in our holes, rifles up, waiting for shapes that did not come. Then motion. 2 figures pulled themselves out of the nearest wreck, black silhouettes against the fire. They stumbled, hands up, coats half burned. One limped, the other held a rag pressed to his face. Their pistols hung from empty holsters. I could see bone through one man's sleeve. Don't shoot, he shouted, the words jagged but clear. Mechaniker. Not soldat. A dozen barrels followed him anyway. The younger of my men, Private Henley, had his finger on the trigger. He'd seen friends die 2 days ago when a white flag trick turned to grenades. I understood his twitch. I also knew this wasn't that. I stepped up behind him and put my palm over the barrel, pushing it toward the snow. He's finished, I said. So are we, if we forget it. Henley's breath came fast through his mask of soot. He didn't answer, but he lowered the P*N. The 2 Germans collapsed in the ditch, coughing, eyes wide in disbelief that they were still whole. We searched them, no P*NS, no maps. Just tools, spanners, a pocket caliper, and one photograph folded small enough to hide in a glove. A woman and a baby, framed by an orchard. The mechanic stared at it as if trying to memorize the faces before we took it away. I handed it back. His shoulders shook once. That was the last time I saw him until 3 days later. During those 3 days the world beyond our bend changed. The blocked road forced the rest of the column to turn south into rough ground. Our artillery, blind until then, found them by sound and opened up. The delay gave the 101st the time it needed to reset its line around Bastogne. Reports called it coincidence. We called it survival. When engineers finally arrived, they counted 2 Panthers burned to the hulls, one immobilized and later captured intact. They photographed everything, angles, shell holes, impact points, for some after-action study that would never mention the word disobedience. The lieutenant signed a form that said enemy armor neutralized by defensive fire. He looked at me while he wrote it, his pen steady. "You don't exist in this paragraph," he murmured. That night we dug graves for our own dead farther up the road, 3 men from another platoon caught by the first volley. The ground was still iron, so we covered them with spruce boughs and snow until the thaw. Someone started humming a hymn. No one joined in. Near midnight a runner came from command, breath frosting in the air. "Hold position until relieved," he said. "Reinforcements at dawn." He saw the wrecks burning beyond the bend and stopped speaking. The light painted his face orange. "Christ," he whispered, "you boys did this?" No one answered. He left before the question grew teeth. At first light the surviving prisoners were marched north under guard. I watched the mechanic limp beside an MP. He turned once and raised 2 fingers, a small, unmilitary salute. I returned it without thinking. By dusk word came through another patrol, that same man had led scouts to a hidden fuel depot a mile behind the German line. They destroyed it before nightfall. 3 convoys that would have hit us next morning never moved. A single Mercy had rippled outward like shrapnel run backward through time. When darkness came again, Doyle sat beside the G*N, helmet in his lap, staring at nothing. "You saved us, Sergeant," he said at last. His voice was the color of ash. "You saved a battalion that doesn't even know your name. But this won't make the report." "I know," I said. He reached for the compass hanging from my pocket chain, turned it in his palm, and gave a short, dry laugh. "Hell of a toy. Works better than the manual," I told him. He nodded, once. "Don't lose it." Then he walked off down the road to meet the relief column that would claim our position, our wrecks, and our story. Behind him, the flames guttered low, and snow began to fall again, quiet, patient, the world resetting itself one flake at a time. By morning, the smoke was gone, the footprints half erased. Only the twisted metal remained, cooling beneath new snow, a monument the army would never build. Somewhere under it, the compass needle pointed true, and I wondered if truth was the same thing as direction. At dawn the snow turned blue. The wrecks looked almost clean under the frost, as if war had been a bad dream that the weather was trying to cover. Our relief column arrived just after sunrise, tired men in olive drab, engines coughing in the cold. They climbed from their trucks, looked at the road, and went quiet. No cheering. No questions. Just a silence that tasted like disbelief. We handed over the G*N, the site, the paperwork that said nothing. Then we walked west, boots crunching over our own footprints frozen into the road. Behind us, the new men took photographs. Someone chalked numbers on the Panther hulls for intelligence records. The wind erased them by noon. By the time we reached the village perimeter, the story had already changed. Word moves faster than supply. A corporal from another company asked if it was true we'd ambushed a battalion of tanks. Someone else said we'd mined the road with captured charges. One rumor had us reinforced by paratroopers who never existed. I didn't correct them. Truth has a shorter range than rumor. Lieutenant Doyle was sent to division headquarters to file the after-action report. When he returned, his eyes were the color of paper ash. "Command satisfied," he said. "They'll note heavy German losses due to terrain and coordination failure." He paused. "You're not in it, Sergeant." "None of us are." "That's fine," I said. "So long as the map shows what happened." He almost smiled. "The map never shows what happened. It only shows what someone decided to remember." That night we bivouacked in a half-collapsed barn outside Clairvaux. The roof leaked melted snow into tin cups. The men drank quietly, each nursing his own thought. Henley sat across from me, turning a shell casing over in his hands like a coin. "You think they'll give you a medal for that compass trick?" he asked. No, I said. And they shouldn't. He frowned. Why not? You stopped 2 Panthers. I looked at the compass hanging from a nail in the beam above me. The needle still trembled from some tiny vibration in the wood. Because it wasn't bravery. It was correction. The boy didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. By Christmas the snow had deepened to the height of a man's knee. Reinforcements turned the wreck site into a strongpoint. Engineers laid mines, artillery zeroed the bend for indirect fire. What had started as a guess became doctrine, someone's textbook example of terrain exploitation in armored defense. They never mentioned a toy compass, or a farmer's geometry. They just called it the Clairvaux pocket. Weeks later, when the line stabilized and the Bulge began to collapse inward, we passed the spot again on a supply run. The Panthers were still there, hulks now half buried, snow melting in the hollow turrets. Someone had spray-painted, "Stopped here," on one of them. I didn't stop to read the rest. After the war, I went home. Ohio smelled the same: diesel, hay, rain on dust. I rebuilt the barn roof and plowed fields that had waited 3 winters for hands. People asked what it was like. I said cold. That was all. I hung the compass on the wall above my workbench, right next to a map of our land. Sometimes I'd catch the light hitting the cracked glass, the needle still trembling though the air was still. It reminded me that direction is never peace, it's simply motion made visible. Doyle wrote me once from a hospital in Virginia. Frostbite had taken 2 toes. He said the official history credited our division with delaying the German counterattack near Clairvaux by a critical 8 hours, enough for reinforcements to close the corridor. They'll never know what 8 hours cost, he wrote. Or who paid it. I folded the letter and tucked it behind the compass. There was nothing to answer. Years went by. The world forgot its frostbite and learned new kinds of cold. Trains replaced convoys, machines changed their skin but not their hunger. Every now and then, a veteran would stop by the farm. We'd drink coffee that tasted of tin and memory. When the talk turned to Luxembourg, someone would always say, "Do you remember that road that blocked the whole German column?" And someone else would say, "Yeah." Nobody ever figured out how they did it. I never corrected them. It didn't matter. The road was still there, and so were the wrecks under the soil. The math remained even if the names didn't. Sometimes, on clear nights, I'd walk out into the fields with the compass in my pocket. The air would be still, the kind that makes every sound a decision. I'd open the lid, watch the needle twitch, and think about the number 202. Southwest. Toward the bend. Toward the place where orders ended and understanding began. They called it an act of luck. I called it alignment. Because sometimes the dumbest idea, the one nobody believes in, the one drawn from a toy in a field's memory, is the only line on the map that leads you home. They laughed at my compass. They called it a trinket, a child's toy, a lucky charm pretending to know north. But on that night near Clairvaux, when maps froze and radios died, it was the only truth left that still moved. A cracked circle of brass, a trembling needle, and one number, 202 degrees. That was where the road bent. That was where the Panthers turned. That was where the rules ended. 2 tanks burned because a farm boy trusted a toy more than a manual. 8 hours of war shifted because a compass refused to lie. I kept it still, hung above my workbench back in Ohio. When the wind rattles the siding and the fields hum under frost, it trembles a little, just like it did that night. They laughed at my compass. Until it stopped 2 German tanks.